seems like Biden's woke Fed nominees prioritize everything but fighting inflation. Not good. Joining me now to talk about is North Dakota Senator Kevin Cramer, member of the Senate Banking Committee, who's had to suffer through these hearings. Senator Cramer, welcome back, sir. You know, just a couple things. You know, the Sarah Bloom Raskin, I mean, I know she's credentialed and whatnot. She is an ardent opponent of fossil fuels. She has said many times in the past, although she tried to skate through it in the hearings, that, you know, she wants to allocate bank loans and credit away from the oil and gas companies and the coal companies, which is not the job of the Fed. But I wanted to ask you, your colleague Cynthia Lummis, Senator Lummis, kind of got on her. Raskin helped this when she left the Federal Reserve Board the last time. She went into private enterprise. Oh, good, I guess. But she helped this fintech firm called Reserve Trust get a master account, which allows clearing through the Federal Reserve System. It's the first fintech trust company to get that, and I think up to now nobody else has ever gotten it. So you have to worry how she did that. And then she made $1.5 million selling stock. And an inside deal, looks like. So what do you make of that, sir? I mean, you're going to have to vote on this and whatnot. How do you see it?
Well, first of all, there's plenty of reasons to vote against Ms. Bloom Raskin, not the least of which was the strong view she has about allocating capital away from legal commerce, mainly in the fossil energy area, and we can talk a lot about that. But with regard to the issue that Senator Lummis raised, first of all, kudos to Cynthia Lummis for catching it, and she actually knows what she's talking about in this arena. And it seems to me it should be a disqualifier, right on its face. It seems like a conflict of interest that was breached. I think it's a serious ethics question, and I think that, you know, I just think it's a disqualifier. And
that it wasn't reported, and then her husband, Congressman Raskin. Now, as I understand it, Ms. Raskin said, well, there was a death in the family or some such, and they were a little out of sync. I understand that, but her husband, who's a very activist left-wing Democrat in the House, he didn't have any trouble during this family crisis period of leading the charge to impeach Donald Trump.
That's right.
So that one just kind of, you know, I could be sympathetic to family issues, Lord knows, but didn't stop him from going after, you know, Trump. So it doesn't hold much water.
No, I totally agree. But even getting back to the allocation of capital away from legal commerce, that is just a frightening concept to me. And you and I worked pretty hard, actually, as I recall, on the Main Street Lending Program to change that date. You might recall that an arbitrary date that tried to squeeze out our smaller oil and gas producers from being eligible because of a credit rating that occurred after the pandemic hit and after the demand sank and after the Saudis were flooding our markets with oil. And she had no sympathy for that and wrote a New York Times op-ed opposing it. So I have lots of reasons to be opposed. And let's remember, this is on top of Lael Brainerd, who's been nominated, and we've already had the hearing for as vice chair, who has similar views, not nearly as bad a rhetoric, but similar views that raise a lot of questions as well.
You know, Senator, it's just, I mean, it occurs that if you want to end fossil fuels or sharply curtail fossil fuels, so, you know, take their money away, take their credit away, whatever. What you're going to do is restrict the supply of energy and raise the cost and price. So, in other words, she's going on the Fed at a time of the worst inflation in decades, and she's got a anti-fossil fuel policy that will cause inflation to go higher, not lower.
No, exactly right. And Larry, this is why this morning I met with the European Union Energy Commissioner to talk specifically about natural gas and the transition to I know Europe wants to go to all renewables. Well, the only way to go to all renewables is to have more natural gas, because you also have to have resiliency and a grid that is always providing electricity to the huge demand. And let's also not forget that demand is growing around the world for natural gas. You see what Democrats are doing now. Several of my colleagues want to shut down the export of liquid natural gas. That will do exactly what you're talking about. By the way, I want to go on the record here and now saying that I have always thought that the Laffer curve supply side economics always made sense. It's always worked, and it will always work.
That's fabulous. I'm sure Art is listening. No, but you did not sign on to this crazy competes bill. You didn't vote for it.
No, I did vote for the Senate version of the Competes bill. I'm absolutely opposed to the House version.
That.
Yeah. Oh yes,
well,
I did.
Well, Senator, let's talk about that for just a moment. Why are you doing this? You're such a sound thinker.
Well, I am a sound thinker, but I also know that China is a serious threat. They play by a different set of rules than we do, and oftentimes when you're talking about global competition, you're not talking about another free market capitalist system that plays by our rules, and China is such a geopolitical, geoeconomic threat. By the way, words that the House took out of the Senate bill, and such a humanitarian threat that I felt like we ought to forward something that sets the stage for better supply chain, better value, or prepares our value chain in the United States to be more competitive with China. But what the House has done to that bill is so atrocious. I don't know for sure, but I doubt a single Republican could support it.
Well, are you in favor of $8 billion to the UN Climate Commission?
I am not in favor of $8 billion to the UN Climate Commission. I would never support such a thing unless it was part of unless it was a leverage or a negotiation that had to be done to get a more reasonable bill done. That's the art of this place. When you only have 50 Republicans and you have 50 Democrats, you have to make some compromises. But no, I worry a lot about that part of the bill.
But Senator, also, you've got $50 billion subsidy to semiconductors, and I just went through a list a few moments ago. How much private investment, $200 billion of private investment in the semiconductor space. Intel in Ohio and Arizona, Taiwan Semi in Arizona, Samsung in Texas, they're all doing it, sir, through private investment. Why do you want big government socialism where we'd be more like China in whether it's the semiconductors or the energy? You've got more new Green Deal stuff in there. You've got the Commerce Department in there. And National Science Foundation, which sometimes does some good, but you're giving them $80 billion. Their whole budget is $8 billion. I mean, Senator Cramer, this cannot be your finest moment. Maybe you'll rethink this.
No, first of all, let me correct myself. I did vote against the final passage of the bill. I did work on it with Todd and trying to, and so at the end I did vote against it. But you raise an important point on the semiconductor piece of it, because I believe that was a piece that was pushed pretty hard by Senator Cornyn, as I recall. Here's our problem. If all nations were created equal and all nations were free market capitalist systems, and we weren't and hadn't, as a part of our history as a nation, acquiesced so much of these things to foreign countries. Remember, the whole trade deal with China, previous to the trade deal, way back when they were given normalization or favored nation status, as it was called, into the WTO, the expectation was that they would be so enamored with our form of economy that they would adapt it. Well, of course, we know that didn't come to pass. In fact, they just stole from us. We are so behind them in the value chain, the supply chain of many of the things that are important, including defense technologies, that there is a sense that we need to jumpstart, that we need to enhance the investment. But let's also remember, Larry, and the more important thing is this: if we had more regulatory reforms on the mining of the critical minerals, that would entice the private sector more, and that's really what I was aiming more at.
So that's my point. Appropriate to free market capitalism and the Laffer curve, if you'd have lower taxes and fewer regulations, including energy regulations, including mining regulations, then we could deal with it. But spending $350 billion, that's just the Washington, D.C. swamp. That's picking winners and losers. That's corporate welfare. And by the way, how are you going to pay for it? Or are we just going to create more inflation? And also, look, I worked hard on the Trump policies for reciprocity with China. And we put up, I didn't like to do it because I'm a free trader, but in the case of China, we had to use tariffs to bring them to the table. I thought it was a pretty good phase one deal, not perfect. Bob Lighthizer was on the show last week. He said, actually, it's moving along okay. But this $350 billion, this is a horse of a different color. This is emulating China's socialism. You can't believe in that. Not you. Not Kevin Cramer, my hero, my idol from the Dakotas. Say it isn't so.
No, I do agree with you, Larry. I'm only making the point that for a lot of even free market Republicans that worked hard on the bill, and I did. I worked with Todd. I would like to have been able to get to a yes. It was a bridge too far. But I also realize that if we're going to get ahead of China, if we're going to leapfrog China in some of these particular technologies, think of the energy sector alone. I mean, we've acquiesced uranium largely to our enemies.
Yep.
Of course, mainly Russia.
Yep.
We need to create policies that bring the entire supply chain back to the United States, or at least among our allies. You have the European Union arguing with itself over whether natural gas is a clean fuel or a polluting fuel. You have them arguing with themselves whether nuclear power is okay or not okay. All the while they're shutting down coal plants.
Yep.
I mean, this is going to have devastating impacts on geopolitics. So I want a solution solid, but I'm always willing to discuss and negotiate.
I'm glad you did.
It was a bridge too far.
That's right. That's so good. That's fine. You know, redemption comes in many areas, sir. It's never too late. In the last segment, I promised to pray for forgiveness for Senator Young. In this segment, we're talking about redemption. Kevin Cramer, you're the best. The producers are screaming at me. We've gone over it. It was a fabulous segment. Thank you for helping us, sir.